Sup y'all, and welcome to Organization and Reorganization of Human Societies, Part 4. In this video, we're going to be looking at the collision of Persia and Greece. Persia was the most imposing and most impressive empire of all the second-wave civilizations. Located along the Iranian plateau and the northern reaches of the earlier Mesopotamian civilizations, it was settled between the Caspian Sea to the north and the Persian Gulf to the south. The Achaemenid dynasty drew many of its cultural traits from Babylon and Assyria. Cyrus began Persia's huge expansion. While a proficient conqueror, he honored local customs and didn't pillage and burn the conquered cities. He instilled a tradition of assimilation and adoption of foreign cultures. For instance, he allowed the Jews exiled in Babylon to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Persia was a multinational state, containing scores of cultures, ethnicities, and nations within its vast borders. Darius used his massive army to expand the empire even further, from Egypt and Anatolia in the west, through the Fertile Crescent, and up to India in the east, containing over 40 million people at its height. A cult of kingship was established, ordained by Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian god. These kings ruled as absolute monarchs, or despots, who often used their power in a cruel and oppressive way. Persepolis, translated as Persian City, was the Persian administrative capital and center of trade, ultimately raised by Alexander the Great. Satraps were local governors who ruled indirectly over 23 provinces, maintaining some autonomy in the regions but ultimately subservient to the king. Each province also had its own military leader and tax collector. However, imperial spies, known as the eyes and ears of the king, ensured the people stayed in line or paid the ultimate price. The empire was held together a couple of ways. The royal road extended from the Persian heartland to Anatolia, measuring over 1,600 miles. It was similar to Ashoka's road in India, connecting the empire through trade and increased communication. Some of the first standardized coins were also used, no longer requiring merchants to weigh and measure odd pieces of gold or silver to trade. The Parthian Empire was a major center of trade along the Silk Road. It was heavily influenced by Greek culture during the first half of its existence, due to the invasion by Alexander the Great. Then, in the second half, it returned to its Persian roots. Due to internal quarrels and continued wars with Rome, it was overtaken by the Sasanian Empire, the last Persian empire prior to the rise of Islam. Classical Greece politically was very different from Persia, comprised of small city-states, or polises, containing 500 to 5,000 male citizens, with varying degrees of democracy. There were between 2 to 3 million citizens, a major contrast to the huge contiguous Persian Empire with a king of kings and population of over 40 million. Greek culture originated around 750 BCE. Known as Hellenes, their political organization was in large part due to geography. The mountainous region and many islands played a major part in the development of small independent city-states. They were a multi-state nation with a similar language and polytheistic religion based on gods from Mount Olympus. Scores of states started competing at the Olympic Games in 776 BCE. Their expansion was based on settlements and colonies, not through conquest as Persia had done. This expansion led to deforestation through the smelting of metals such as iron, necessitating vast amounts of wood. Iconic Greek buildings and city centers were developed, such as fortified hilltops known as an acropolis. They also expanded citizenship, with equality of all before the law. Initially, only wealthy men had this privilege, then lower-class males. Tyrants ruled over these city-states. Now, this is different from the modern meaning. In fact, many of these rulers were fairly benevolent and supportive of the masses. Athens was the most democratic, where citizens, all men, were allowed to take part in their assembly. Public officers were chosen by lot and paid so the poor could hold office. Unlike modern republicanism, this was direct democracy, where citizens could vote on laws directly. A great weakness of this is mob rule, in which a small majority can legally subjugate the rest of the people. While democratic on the surface, women, slaves, and foreigners could not become citizens, and therefore did not participate in the decision-making process. The Persian Wars occurred when the Persians dominated Ionian settlements, leading to revolts that were initially supported by Athens and other Greek states. Under Darius, the Persians attacked, but were defeated by the Greeks in 490 BCE at the Battle of Marathon. The Greeks used the phalanx, where the soldiers massed their shields together and used spears to decimate their enemies. Theodippides famously ran 26 miles to tell the Athenians not to surrender, and then reportedly collapsed and died. The Persians attacked again in 480 BCE under King Xerxes. The famous Battle of Thermopylae pit 300 Spartans plus 7,000 other Greeks against the Persians, holding them off for 3 days until they were all killed after a Greek traitor showed the Persians a goat path flanking the Greeks. All told, this established the East-West divide that still exists today, with Persia representing Asia as well as despotism and autocracy, and Greece representing Europe and freedom. What followed was the Golden Age of Greece from around 500 to 300 BCE, in which the Parthenon, a temple to Athena, was built, among other great developments. However, over time, Athens grew more despotic and imperialist. The Peloponnesian War pit Athens versus Sparta and their allies, in which Sparta won but greatly weakened the Greek city-states in general, paving the way for a foreign invasion. Macedonia smelled blood in the water, and Philip II conquered Greece in 338 BCE. Alexander, his son, led a Greek expedition against Persia and beyond, expanding his empire from Egypt and Anatolia to Afghanistan and India, which was under the Mauryan Empire. He defeated Persia, destroying Persepolis, and was celebrated by many of the people as a liberator from the Persians. Alexander was called the King of Asia and Pharaoh by the Egyptians. After he died, his empire was divided, and what followed was known as the Hellenistic era, from 323 to 30 BCE. This time period saw the diffusion of Greek culture through monuments, assemblies, theater, language, and so on. Alexandria in Egypt became the intellectual and cultural center of the world, a multicultural city that had a famous museum and attracted scholars from scores of civilizations. Alexandria had a harbor for over 1,000 ships, and its library had over 700,000 volumes. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Macedonians and Greeks comprised of around 10% of the population, but they were the elites, under different legal systems. Syncretism occurred through cultural mixing and assimilation. Intermarriage was encouraged by Alexander, and in some instances, foreigners eventually could become Greek citizens. Now, Athens was viewed as progressive and democratic, but it was restrictive towards women. They had no role in government, and in legal proceedings they had to be represented by a male. Aristotle stated they had a passive role in reproduction, acting as a receptacle, and they ended up marrying much older men. Women remained in the home and produced sons, in a similar vein as China. Girls were not formally educated, remaining illiterate, but learned to spin and weave. Land was passed on to male heirs. Homosexuality was commonplace for males and females. A typical relationship was an older man with an adolescent boy, commensurate with their patriarchal and male property-owning society. Sparta, by contrast, conquered neighboring city-states. Their captives were known as helots, bound to the land like serfs, essentially slaves. Greatly outnumbering the Spartans, they often threatened rebellion and even rose in revolt at times. As such, Sparta became militaristic. Boys were removed from their families at the age of 7. Mothers told them to come back with their shield or on it. The boys trained and remained at barracks until age 30. They were not prisoners, and they did have some freedom, able to converse with others, including girls. Sparta lacked the democracy of Athens, with the Council of Elders as the most powerful political entity, made up of 28 wealthy men over 60. For females, their main role was also reproduction and the birthing of warriors. However, they gained a level of equality unheard of in other Greek states. Girls engaged in sports, education, they were not secluded at home, and often wore skimpier clothing than other Greeks, primarily for movement. Unlike their Athenian counterparts, they usually married men of their own age. And unlike other Greek states, they mostly prohibited homosexuality, requiring both sexes to subjugate the helots. Greek culture also produced rationalism, a methodology used to discover truth through intellect and deduction. Its focus on logic and questioning in order to gain wisdom was contrary to many other cultures that relied on superstition to explain strange phenomena. They believed the world was a physical reality, governed by natural laws, not an illusion as in Taoist or in some Hindu and Buddhist thought. The Greeks had a similar secular view as Confucianism. Humans possess the ability to reason and figure out the mysteries of the universe as well as ourselves. Athenian freedom, especially, led to the rise of rational thought and the rise of philosophers, or lovers of wisdom. Socrates didn't write or keep records, believing this would weaken the mind. He advocated constant questioning, known now as the Socratic method. Humans should pursue wisdom and virtue, not wealth and power. And he considered himself to be the gadfly, stinging citizens into awareness. In 399 BCE, he was ultimately sentenced to death for corrupting the youth, imbibing a drink containing poison hemlock. One of his students, Plato, wrote down a great deal of what Socrates taught him, but was a champion of philosophy in his own right. In the Republic, he did not promote democracy, but meritocracy, where guardians and a philosopher king or benevolent dictator were seen as the only ones fit to rule. Aristotle, a student of Plato, wrote on virtually every topic. He advocated empirical observation, and that virtue was the result of rationalism. Clearly, Greece was the foundation of Western civilization. Rationalism, theater, literature, art, and construction persisted for centuries and even to this day.
That is correct.